All right, talk of the table. It happened, as we know, almost 10 years after the 9/11 attacks. President Obama walking down this hall to address the nation. I remember like it was yesterday on a Sunday night in 2011. And he told the world that the U.S. had killed Osama bin Laden. Well, it took some time, but eventually we learned the story. Bin Laden had been hiding in Pakistan. 2 teams of Navy SEALs flew in via helicopter, raided the compound, and 1 SEAL confronted, then shot and killed the Al-Qaeda leader. But we had never heard from the SEALs themselves. That is until now. Navy SEAL Robert O'Neill now says he is the man who pulled the trigger and killed bin Laden. He's now telling his story even though many in the Navy and the rest of the military don't want him to. And that's leading some to decry what they're calling as a double standard.
How many former secretaries of defense have written books? How many former generals have written books? How many former SOCOM, special operations commanders, have written books? I'm a nobody, right?
And you know what? He regrets the attention that came about this. He's talked about that it's fractured some relationships that he has from former Navy SEALs. No,
really?
Listen, I heard this whole guy in 60 Minutes. You could see he was a little tortured by the whole thing. He didn't clear it with the Pentagon. I got a problem with that. But at the same point, if you're not going to divulge secrets, there is an argument. I'm not saying I'm 100% with it. There is a bit of a double standard here. I don't like him deciding what should or shouldn't be in the public domain. But at the same point, Leon Panetta wrote a book talking all about this. He's the defense secretary, right? And these were the guys on the ground. How do you guys think? Don't give me the Cheshire Cat thing. Speak, man. Damn, I'm throwing a book out there.
We may be here a while.
Yeah, exactly.
Richard, you got to see this for what it is. It's called money, money, money. It's called, you know how much money he's going to make on the speaking circuit?
Okay, so you got a problem him doing it?
Of course.
All right.
He's endangering secrets. There goes the element of surprise for Navy SEALs. And who was he to be the one out of all the SEALs and all the time that he's going to decide, because he wants to be a millionaire, that he's going to talk?
How's he's endangering Navy? I mean, he's retired, so it's not like he's going to show up in somebody's bathtub and
you're still revealing you're revealing operations to a degree.
Well, but
a
lot of that's been revealed already. Like, my only concern on this is, let's say people are able to find photos of him with other people who are still active Navy SEALs and he puts them in jeopardy. I agree with you, he should have cleared it through the Pentagon, but I also don't think that the Pentagon should have necessarily rejected it if he tried to clear it. He didn't, so I'm not suggesting that they did.
His first attorney, he claims, really screwed this, because he said, I asked him to go through the proper channels for what we had to do. It's not an excuse. I'm just repeating what he said. And the first attorney did, not the second attorney. So he's like, the Pentagon's a great institution. We defer to them and all the rest. So he's trying to cover it. But it's just an interesting thing as to, is there a double standard from the commanders versus the people who carry out the mission?
There is, and there should be a double standard. But I also think that if he wasn't giving out information that could put other people in harm's way, I think it should be okay for him to tell a story.
Okay, now, one last look back on Election Day, I promise. Turnout way down to the lowest levels that we saw in decades. Now, everybody on the panel agrees more people should vote. Voting should be made easier, and that attempts to block voters are politically motivated, and it's bad. But the question is, what can and should we do to encourage voting? Now, there's calls to make Election Day a holiday. Others say you move Election Day to a Thursday or a weekend, or make it election week here. Elections in India, they take a month and a half in certain cases. Other countries like Brazil, they make voting compulsory. You don't vote, you pay an additional tax. And 14 years after 2000 and that election debacle, there are still complaints about voting systems. Card readers jam or break electronic systems and misread voters. Just ask Andrew if you run into him in the street. He'll tell you horror stories. Poll workers who are less than attentive and more, including one who asked me who I voted for at the top of her lungs. That for another day. Yes. I walked in. And I walked in. The first old lady, sweet as can be, 6 years ago, goes, "Oh, I know you." And I'm like, hi. She goes, "You're going to vote for Obama, aren't you?" And I'm like, I don't think you should ask me that. So I come out of the poll. And the other one, because they're convinced, right? These sweet old grandladies that goes, "Who'd you vote for, sweetie?" She said you voted for Obama. I'm like, you shouldn't be doing that. Don't ask anyone else that today. So anyway, but the point is, let's start with the hardest one, okay? I don't think we make it a month and a half, but do you think we make it compulsory? If you choose still not to, you pay a penalty. Andrew was talking to me about Brazil, that if you didn't literally vote here, when you came back, once you're back there, you got to pay that tax. Is that a good idea, or is that against democratic ideals that now you're forcing people to do something they shouldn't have to?
I think it may be a good idea because the bottom line, Richard, and I know this won't make you too happy, but the American people...
Why start now? Go ahead.
Right?
Yeah.
The American people know that most politicians are outright phonies. And that's why half the country, and crooks.
Right now, I can hear Richard Bronski's car squealing on some...
But Richard, it's the truth.
Okay.
And now most are good people. But half the country doesn't vote. Why is that?
Because they don't feel invested in the process.
That's not the fault of people running for office. That's a lot of the fault of the people who are voting or aren't voting. I don't think it should be compulsory. I think one of the freedoms we enjoy is the freedom not to participate in something if we don't want to. I've heard talk from some
How
people...
about with penalty, though?
No. Again, that's compulsory still. That's like...
compulsory is you can mitigate what the penalty is.
That's like the Obamacare penalty there, because there is one if you don't get... So we don't want to do that again. So I heard somebody talk about putting in a lottery, so that if you voted, you get entered into a lottery for like a 7-figure or an 8-figure...
Are we then bribing people to vote?
You are essentially bribing people to vote, which brings us back to Chicago and Tammany Hall and some of the other good old days. I think one of the best things we could do would be extend the voting time. I love early voting.
You really think that's going to make a difference?
I do. It certainly made it. When I had early voting in Texas, and I can't believe I had to be in Texas to enjoy early voting because there isn't any in New York. It made it easier for me to vote, and I heard from other people it made it easier for them to vote. So I think that would help. I think perhaps the holiday would help too. If you make Election Day a national holiday, people don't get the day off from work.
It's funny, some schools are closed, some aren't. It's kind of funky how that works. I don't know, then there's also the argument, people who don't follow this at all.
Right.
You want your vote canceled out by somebody who's just like, who's the president? Oh, okay, and they just,
My vote gets canceled out by somebody doing that every single time. And then as for the voting systems, I still, for the life of me, I hate those fill-in-the-dot things. I voted in a butterfly ballot in Florida.
With the scanner?
Yeah. What happened to the old lever thing?
Well, it's funny you brought up the story about the old ladies, and we love them. But when I voted, I had the same experience, and I'm like, every old lady in Rockland County works for the Board of Elections here. And they're like, Sonny? And I'm like, huh? I'm like, ma'am, there I am right there.
I seriously was ready for one of them to walk in the booth with me and be like, okay, who? And I was like,
and
come
then when I
on.
went through the scanner, I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
How do I know that I'm actually voting for who I want to vote for?
All right. Up next, something we can all agree on, and that is honoring the troops. 3 separate events helping the nation say thank you in a number of different ways. We're going to bring them to you next.